welcoming you to our wellness webinar, our May webinar here that we are just getting started. Lots of folks joining us. So grateful that you could join us today on our topic of eating well to live well with Waldenstroms with our guest, chef and oncology nurse, Laura Pohl. My name is Anne. I am the IWMF's Wellness Program Coordinator. And we had about 150 people register for this, and we're here with a live group of over 40 people. Thank you so much for taking good care of yourself through learning new things to stay and live well. What to eat to support your well-being while you're navigating a cancer diagnosis is such a popular topic. It comes up in so many of our support group chats. Food really is medicine. I will just sort of do a little disclaimer here that the subject of eating and diet can be a controversial one and could be upsetting or triggering for some of us. So I want to just underline there is no one right diet prescription for everyone. Please bear that in mind as we proceed. And these integrative practices are to be used in conjunction with standard medical treatment, along with the approval of your doctor. I know that you will have hopefully brought your questions with you today. We'll have time for them at the end. Feel free to type your questions or messages into the chat throughout our webinar, and I will do my best to funnel them to Laura at the end. And then we'll pause, we'll take the recording off, and we'll have a little bit of chat at that time as well. Thank you so much to our wonderful IWMF staff support team. Shelley is here to help us manage our large group. So just a reminder, stay muted unless we invite you to unmute during the Q&A period. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Laura Pohl, who wears many, many hats. She is the Director of Nourishment Education Programs at Smith Center for Healing and the Arts, which is a really neat place, as well as the head chef for their cancer retreats. She offers popular cooking classes that help participants translate a diet prescription to a plate of nourishing, delicious food. And I'm betting we're all going to get hungry during this webinar. She has created and coordinated trainings for professionals and patients in culinary translation. And I just love that term, and I'm going to be adopting that term. She's been cooking for people with serious illness and integrative oncology navigation. She's also the senior clinical consultant for Cancer Choices Integrative Cancer Cancer Care website, which is a really great resource. And I hope to point you in that direction through our resources. As an oncology clinical nurse specialist, integrative oncology nurse navigator, and culinary translator, Laura has been, she's been caring for people with serious illness for over 40 years. And today we're really lucky to have Laura here. She's going to help us tackle some of the practical aspects of translating a dietary prescription to a plate of delicious, healthy food. And she's also going to share a recipe with us. So Laura, I always like to start off with a question to our guest, and then I'll turn it all over to you. I'm curious why you said yes to this opportunity to work with our group of folks caring for Waldenstroms.
Oh, wow. Well, I love to talk about food and eating, and I believe there is healing potential in that. And I also have seen what it does for me when I'm not feeling well to actually cook for myself or cook for someone else. So I just love everything around this topic. And interestingly, I have not, because WM Waldenstrom's is so rare, I have not had the opportunity to work with many people who have had that. So I also welcome the opportunity to learn something new myself. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And I learned that you also spoke with Meg, who was helped you a little bit sort of tailor this for our group. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
So glad that you took the extra time to get to know our population a little better. And we're really happy to have you here.
Glad to be here too. Well, one thing that I didn't share with Anne Grace is that I'm a musician. And I'm in a trio called Trifocal. so we're a folk trio. And I love to blend music in, fold it in with my blender into my presentation. So I'd like to share a little performance of a high fiber, low fat song. Let's see, I need to share, share my screen. Okay, here we go. So here we are performing this high fiber, low fat food that has nutritional advice in it that's already out of date, but it's still a lot of fun. Comes from a happy chicken. Honey grew up some coffee. I got a new treat for you. Gonna make our loving last. Our hearts will beat like new. It's oat bran muffin. Oat bran muffin. Oat bran muffin. Oat bran muffin. Put them in the oven for lifelong loving. Oat bran muffins. Well, I used to be a ham and cheese omelet girl with a bagel and cream cheese too. But if you wanna have fun past 31, 41, 61, 71, 81, then you gotta make a change or two. So toss out that tub of butter, T-bone steak and eggs, whip up the bran and the egg beaters. Honey, don't make me beg. Give me those old bran muffins. Old bran muffins. Old bran muffins. Old bran muffins. Put them in the oven for lifelong loving. Old bran muffins.
Well, now, Lord, I know that a muffin alone won't keep that doctor away. So here's my solution. Let's join that revolution. And we'll start a brand new day.
We'll start with oat bran crunch for breakfast. Then it's oat bran bread at noon. We'll have oat bran tofu, meatless loaf, and have a bathroom bill for two.
Oat bran muffin.
Oat bran muffin.
Oat bran muffin.
Put them in the oven for lifelong loving.
Oat bran muffin.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, ever since we learned this song, we have become true believers in oat bran. Say amen. Amen. Here you again. Amen. And we believe that if he had used it, Elvis Presley would be alive and with us today. He'd be here getting acupuncture and psychotherapy. Wait a minute, ladies and gentlemen. Elvis is in the building.
Oat bran muffin. Oat bran muffin. Oat bran muffin. Oat bran muffins. Don't worry me at all, 'cause it lowers my cholesterol.
Oh my God.
Thank you very much.
So that was my trio. Yes, thank you very much. And I like to start with that somewhat unrefined song because it reminds me of what I think is one of the major problems with food these days is that it's so refined. We've lost the fiber of life and the fiber of our food and a number of other nutrients. Anyway, and that's a little proof that I am also a musician, and some people call me a chef nursing because I'm a chef and a nurse and a musician. All right, so I'm glad you enjoyed the oat bran muffins. I am going to share my screen again and get us to this little PowerPoint I've shared with you since I don't have real food here. What we'd like to accomplish today is that you'll learn about eating well, to improve wellness and make the body less hospitable to cancer. I'll be going over some principles of healthy food selection and giving you some resources to help you take it from here. So people often confuse what I do, thinking I'm a nutritionist. And though I learned nutrition in nursing school, I am not a nutritionist. I am not a dietitian. As Anne Grace said, I'm a culinary translator, and I went to the Natural Gourmet Cookery School to learn how to become a health supportive chef. So what I like to say as I do culinary translation with people is that we focus on nourishment rather than nutrition. So nourishment is food and other substances that are necessary for growth, health, and good condition. And it's something that nourishes, and it may be food, but it could be, you could be nourished by something else, by a walk in nature. So consider that there are all sorts of nourishments, and to nourish is to give something or someone what it needs, the food and the other things that promote health, help you to develop and grow stronger, giving the care that people need to live, to grow, and be healthy. So I'm coming from a standpoint of nourishment and not nutrition. Anne Grace mentioned that I also work for an organization called Cancer Choices, which is an evidence-based, open access, meaning free, website that provides information on integrative cancer care, which is the blending of conventional, complementary therapies, and self-care practices in someone's cancer care. And we really place a lot of credence in the seven healing practices. You might see these called different things by different organizations, but here are ours, and you'll see that one of the 7 healing practices is eating well. Let us talk about nourishment through food. And by the way, when you get the PDF, everything that is a link, you will be able to click on and it will take you to that page. So a lot of the information we're talking about comes from this page on Cancer Choices. Lots of good information on eating well, and there's a page like this for every healing practice. So my 4 guiding principles. One is there are no good or bad foods. Foods just give information. So what do I mean by that? Well, take me, for example. I know that soy can be a health supportive food for many people, but for me, I get information if I eat it that is uncomfortable. I get bloating, I get joint pain, I get brain fog, and so that's just information. It doesn't mean soy in itself is a bad food, but for me, it gives me information. I have a food sensitivity to it, and so I'm just not going to eat it. Another principle is you can't eat dogma. So how many of you have had people come to you saying, oh, I just read about this diet, or here, eat this special food, I can order all this stuff for you, or go online, or, the thing is there is no, as Anne Grace said, there's no one right or wrong diet for everybody, because actually as you go through different things in your life, different ages, different stages, you need different diets, different foods. So keep that in mind. If you don't remember anything else but this from Michael Pollan, eat real food, not too much, and mostly plants. And I'm sure you've heard a lot about plant-based diet or plant-forward diet. And in general, for general health for anyone, whether you have any kind of illness, a plant-forward, plant-based diet. It doesn't mean everything comes from plants, but most of what you eat is from plants. And that's a pretty broad spectrum. We're talking vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, grains. So lots of choices of plants to eat. And also eat your vegetables. So of all the plants that one can eat, vegetables really, if you made a pyramid, like the old food pyramid, having vegetables in the broader part of the pyramid is one of the best things you can do. And I'm not talking like loads of potatoes. I know they're a vegetable. And some people think corn is a vegetable. It's actually a grain. But I'm talking about dark leafy greens, deep orange vegetables. So just a wide variety. It's not to say you should never eat potatoes or corn, but just have a wide variety of vegetables. Now, I'd like us to think about our bodies as a garden. Let's talk a little bit about tending your garden. So I don't know if you've heard this term, terrain, but it's becoming much more widely used among integrative medicine circles. And so terrain is the physical features and the state of a person's body and the influence that state has on health and disease prevention. So actually, the state of your terrain can influence your level of health and whether or not you are more susceptible to illness. There is another environment in you called the tumor microenvironment in people who have tumors. And this is the little environment that surrounds the tumor. And what it is composed of your normal cells and molecules and blood vessels, and they surround a tumor and they feed the tumor cells. And a tumor can start co-opting these normal cells in its environment for its own purposes. So they're actually looking now at ways to alter the tumor microenvironment. And of course, your larger body terrain can have something to do with that. So in modifying terrain, what we're doing is creating a body that cancer doesn't like, creating a body less hospitable to cancer. And using food is a way to do that. There are many what we call terrain factors. Three of the ones that we'll focus on that have links to diet is high blood sugar and insulin resistance, inflammation, and the state of your microbiome. When it's out of balance, it's sometimes called dysbiosis. So let's talk a little bit about high blood sugar and insulin resistance. So any of us could have this issue. It's not particularly related to having cancer, but it can have an influence on cancer because it influences that microenvironment around cancer cells. So people ask me, Laura, is this sugar feed cancer? It's not exactly like that, but there is a connection. And when we say sugar, I'm including what we call high glycemic, low carbohydrates. Some of the worst of those is highly refined, say, cakes with sugar in them and things like that. I wanted to explain the term glycemic load. So you probably more commonly heard the term glycemic index, which is a measure of the effects that the carbohydrates in food have on blood sugar levels. But you have to think about other things that might influence whether or not that carbohydrate is going to have as great an influence on your blood sugar levels. And that's what glycemic load helps us account for. So it thinks about, it's not only does this carbohydrate affect blood sugar, but how much did you consume of it? The more consumed, the greater the effect on your blood sugar. What are other factors that might affect it? I learned an interesting thing that potatoes, after they're cooked, if they are cooled off and put in the fridge, and then maybe the next day you make a potato salad or something out of that, the potato has a lower glycemic load than if you eat it when it's hot. If you eat grains that are ground up into a flour, as opposed to eating like a whole grain, like eating brown rice, for instance, If it's been ground up into a flour and made into like brown rice pasta, it would have a higher glycemic load. If you eat food, a carbohydrate along with some fats and fiber, it would reduce the glycemic load. So you get an idea that different things and ways you eat and prepare food can affect the glycemic load. And a serving of particular food, if it has a glycemic load value of 10 or less, is considered low. 20 or higher is considered high. And I'm going to give you some examples of this. But here are some foods, no surprises here, that have moderate to high glycemic load. White bread, bagels, some oat bran muffins. I make an oat bran muffin that is higher in protein and uses unrefined grains and that sort of thing. So there are ways to even make some of these less effect on your blood sugar. Soda pop, we call liquid candy. So all of these, probably no surprise. Here are some foods with a moderate to high glycemic load that might surprise you. So like whole wheat bread. It's better to eat whole grain bread than it is to eat refined flour bread like white bread. But when you grind up a whole grain, as I said before, and turn it into a flour, your body can much more readily pull out the carbohydrate and turn it into glucose once it gets in your blood. I don't know if you've ever heard of sprouted grain bread, but in that type of bread, sometimes it's called Ezekiel, there's many brands, they do not grind up the grains and the legumes and the seeds that they put in that bread. They sprout it, and then they have a way of making it into a very delicious product. So grinding things into flours will increase the glycemic load. Even oatmeal and brown rice has a somewhat moderate glycemic load, but again, eat it with some, maybe have that oatmeal with some nuts or nut butter, or have another protein with some fat in that meal. The maximum recommended estimated glycemic load per day, and by the way, I don't go and measure it for myself, and I don't think you need to, but just to give you some idea, 100 or less distributed throughout the day is kind of the max. So let's just take a look at this. Coke, and I'm not just picking on Coca-Cola, but any sugar sweetened or fructose, high fructose corn syrup sweetened beverage would probably fit the bill. So if you drink 4 8-ounce bottles of Coke, and some people drink a lot of soft drinks in a day, so 4 8 ounces is, these are small bottles by today's standards, but 4 of these have 100 grams of high fructose corn syrup. It has a glycemic load of 136. Remember, we said 100 a day is kind of the max, and already the maximum glycemic load has been exceeded by just these 4 drinks. And it also has an inflammation factor of minus 1022. So if it's a minus number, it means it's inflammatory. And the bigger the minus number, the more inflammatory it is. What's the deal about fructose? So a lot of things have been sweetened, even your like green teas and many beverages sweetened with high fructose corn syrup. And fructose is a form of sugar. It's also in honey and fruit. In honey, you're getting a pretty high dose of it because there's no fiber to go along with eating the honey. But fructose is kind of a fruit-derived sugar. And if in a study, they looked at people who drank fructose versus glucose-sweetened drinks with a meal. And those who did drink the fructose released less insulin and leptin and more ghrelin. Well, insulin and leptin are hormones that tell your body it's full, and ghrelin tells your body it's hungry. So you see, you're drinking this stuff, it should be making you feel full, but it's telling you you're hungry. And it also raises triglycerides. And so the recommendation obviously is to limit your intake of fructose sweetened drinks And actually, that doesn't mean if it's sweetened with cane sugar, you should just go ahead and drink lots of it, because you're still getting sugar and it eventually will be turned to glucose in your blood. By the way, having a lot of fructose in your diet can raise your blood pressure, especially if you have kidney problems. So, and the minute you stop taking in so much fructose in these folks who got high blood pressure, it came down. So you're asking, what in the heck can I drink? And I don't recommend necessarily drinking a lot of beverages sweetened with artificial sweeteners as well. But how about a smoothie made from frozen unsweetened strawberries, which have a glycemic load of 2, and it's mildly anti-inflammatory. Add a tablespoon of almond butter to give you a little bit of fat and some fiber and protein. There is no effect on your glycemic load from almond butter, and also it's mildly anti-inflammatory. And then add some water to that, and you've got a delicious way of giving yourself some hydration and a treat. So what's the connection between sugar and cancer? And again, I emphasize that we're talking high glycemic, low carbohydrates. So cancer cells consume 10 to 50 times more glucose than normal cells. That's because they're doing a lot of work. They're constantly dividing, and so they need fuel to do that. The pancreas will release more insulin, which insulin comes along with it gives you some growth hormone, because it thinks, well, if the cell needs glucose, it's busy, and I'll give it some growth hormone so it can also grow, and that can actually stimulate tumors. And also, too much sugar or high glycemic low carbohydrates contribute to chronic inflammation, which we'll talk about in a minute. Too much will lead to obesity, and you keep over consuming these, and you can come up with insulin resistance, which means the cells no longer respond to insulin, the normal cells. The insulin is trying to get glucose in those cells, and normal cells say, no, I am resisting you because I don't need any more glucose. And then because the cancer cells need glucose, then the insulin can take the glucose to the cancer cells. So what's the problem with insulin resistance? Well, in research, we find that persistently high blood glucose is associated with lower cancer survival, higher risk of recurrence, more postoperative complications, immune system suppression with higher risk of infection. And we know that with Waldenstrom's, people are concerned about their immunity because of the way Waldenstrom's affects the immune system. So what's left to eat? Well, that's coming in just a little bite. I want to talk about inflammation now. The inflammatory response is a part of your immune system. We need it. Without inflammation, we would die from infections and injuries, because inflammation comes to the site of an acute injury, and it brings all sorts of good things with it to help clot the blood, to help bring neutrophils, which are those white blood cells that fight and gobble up microorganisms, and it also brings things that helps the tissue heal. That we need. But what's happening today is many of us have chronic inflammation, perhaps from our diet, perhaps stress is contributing, other things in the environment, not getting enough activity, not sleeping well. And that's the kind of inflammation that can lead to problems. What foods and diets are related to chronic inflammation? And by the way, when I say problems, inflammatory cells around a tumor that becomes part of the tumor microenvironment, the tumor uses those for its own purposes. But eating the standard or sad American diet with lots of sugary foods and diet drinks and refined grains and processed meats like cold cuts that have nitrates in them, not eating enough cruciferous or yellow-orange vegetables, also high-fat diets, especially those that are high in trans fats or high in cholesterol. And an example of it, if you eat a high-fat fast food breakfast, that will increase your inflammatory substances in your blood that last about 3 to 4 hours. And let's say your next meal has a similar kind of pattern, high-fat, refined foods, and then another 3 to 4 hours, and then dinner's the same. You can see where maybe 12 hours of the day or so, add snacks in there with even more, you've got these inflammatory substances in your bloodstream. So what else fans the fires of inflammation? Well, excess body fat, especially around the abdominal organs, we call that visceral fat, they release inflammatory hormones and chemicals. So it's not just fat that's there not doing anything, that it's very active. I know smoking isn't a food, but it's a big culprit in inflammation. Periodontal disease, or having a low-grade infection or inflammation anywhere in the body, can increase to inflammation everywhere. So what foods help quench the fires of inflammation? Well, in general, plants, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, leafy greens, avocados, beans, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. And a lot of these foods are high in magnesium, which decreases inflammatory substances in the blood. Also turmeric, that yellowish orange spice, and olive oil and flaxseed and hemp seed, chia seeds, walnut oils. So there is fat that can be healthy and necessary in our diet. And wild-caught salmon and other wild-caught fatty fish. And why wild-caught? Well, we are what they eat. So if a salmon is farm-raised, it's fed a meal that actually has corn in it. And I don't know of corn growing in the bottom of the ocean. So when they're wild-caught, they eat what they normally eat. And that usually conveys they're eating krill and things like that, which are high in omega-3 fatty acids. And that's passed on to the fish, which is then passed on to us when we eat it. So now I'll move out of inflammation and talk about microbiome as being another terrain factor. You are feeding trillions when what you eat feeds your microbiome. There are more cells of microorganisms in your body, a lot of them in your gastrointestinal tract, than there are human cells in you. So if you think about it, if we are home to these trillions of microorganisms, they want their house to be pleasant and health supportive. So they're going to do things to keep us healthy as well. So we need to think of the gut not as a gutter, but as a garden. These microorganisms have co-evolved with us since the beginning of time, and they have this symbiotic relationship with us. They can help support our gut wall integrity, which is really important. You don't want things getting across into the bloodstream until they've been fully digested and assimilated. They signal to other microorganisms that affects our metabolism, affects our nervous system, it affects our immune system, whether or not there's inflammation, all sorts of effects. And when the gut garden isn't thriving, there can be links to poor health and cancer. For instance, H. pylori overgrowth in the stomach not only can cause ulcers, but it's associated with stomach cancer. These imbalanced microbiome can influence your insulin, leading to hyperinsulinism, obesity, inflammation, hyperestrogenism, cancer cell proliferation, because there aren't enough of these short-chain fatty acids that normally these microorganisms are making in our gut for our benefit. It can compromise immune function. And actually, it's affected with mood, depression, and anxiety. And you will find a different microorganism component in people who are depressed than people who are not. And also, it can lead to infections like C. difficile. So what can you do with your diet to help your microorganisms that are living in you. One can use food to reseed your garden. Let's say you've had antibiotics and it's killed a lot of the healthy microorganisms in your gastrointestinal tract. So things like miso, which is a fermented food, you can get it as soy or chickpea, sauerkraut that's naturally fermented, yogurt, other naturally pickled foods, kefir, kombucha. So this is a way to reseed your garden. And also, you want to feed the microorganisms, and they just love cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cabbage and kale and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts, and also beans and legumes. So these are foods that actually feed the microorganisms in your gastrointestinal tract, and then they turn it into some substances that are very supportive of your health. So optimizing your health and balancing your terrain may improve your well-being and prevent and manage symptoms. And also, I was reading some of the material about Waldenstrom's and about it often being something you live with for a long time, and it may not even progress to the point where you need conventional treatments. But they also use the term watchful waiting. And in integrative oncology circles, we like to use the word active surveillance, which means you aren't just sitting and waiting around for the next test. Those tests are important, but in the meantime, you are doing active things with your lifestyle to make your terrain healthier, to make your body less hospitable to illness. So let's just take a diet that's designed to reduce fatigue, because I understand fatigue can be a problem in Waldenstrom's. So a study by Dr. Susanna Zick and her colleagues found that in women with breast cancer, there was less fatigue if they ate a diet rich in fruit, vegetables, whole grains, and foods high in omega-3 fatty acids. And this diet was especially designed to address fatigue. Well, that was breast cancer. Now they are doing this study using this diet in a type of lymphoma, not Waldenstrom's, but another type. But there's no reason to think, with considering what we know about a plant-based diet of this type, its benefits, that it's likely to help people with all kinds of issues with fatigue. Of course, if you have anemia contributing to your fatigue or low B12, then you need to have those things taken care of as well. But a healthy diet might help reduce fatigue. Some other eating well considerations with fatigue: a Mediterranean diet, which is a plant-based diet, shows up. Green tea, less fatigue after surgery. Also, when you combine eating well with physical activity, the two activities together was more effective than using one alone. So in other words, it does matter what you eat. Even though I can't believe to this day, sometimes oncologists and even oncology dietitians tell people it doesn't matter what you eat, just don't lose weight, eat what you can. But I went to culinary school to prove to myself that that was not the case. It does matter what you eat for health. And it doesn't have to be hard to take, and it doesn't necessarily have to taste bad. It means that the food is tasty and you're able to weave it into your budget and your life. So if you're thinking about changing the course, some guiding principles is thinking about your dietary plans, that they are affordable and their foods are readily available and they fit your lifestyle. And I'm going to go over now 8 principles of health supportive food selection. Here are the 8 principles, and I'm going to go over each one of them. So when I go to my refrigerator, or I go to make a grocery list, or I plan a menu when I cook for the retreats for people with cancer, I use these 8 principles as much as I can. So one is whole food, eating the food that nature provides with all the parts that are edible. So for instance, eating an apple with the skin on, I would get an organic apple if you're going to get an apple, as opposed to drinking a glass of apple juice. Obviously, if you take out all the fiber and all those phytonutrients that are in the skin, you're going to get a very high glycemic load drink from that apple. Much better off to eat the whole apple. It doesn't mean that if you enjoy eating poultry, for instance, that you sit there and eat the whole chicken by yourself in one setting. But, and excuse the bones, but if you've cooked the chicken or fish with the bone in it, and I know that's getting less and less common, but let's say you bake a whole chicken, the meat will be moister and the minerals in the bones will go into the flesh that you eat, and then you can take these bones and make a wonderful, high in mineral bone broth from it. Take a whole grain. Let's say this is a grain of wheat. It has 3 layers, the outer bran layer, the germ layer, which means this is the part that germinates when you soak a seed and becomes a plant. The endosperm is the inner part. Where are the nutrients in this grain? The bran and the germ, which is usually what's taken out when you refine a grain. This is where the fiber is, and many of the nutrients, the phytochemicals, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, and there aren't a lot of calories in the bran and the germ. The endosperm is where you have your starch. It's energy rich, but there's very little fiber in there. There also is some protein in that endosperm. But the point is, when you take out the bran and the germ, you're taking out so much of the nutrients and nutrition in that grain of wheat. And so then what do? They enrich it, but we still need the fiber. So the take home is all the parts of the grain beautifully work together synergistically in the life of the plant. And when we eat that whole grain, this synergy and harmony is passed on to us as nourishment. Some examples of whole grain: quinoa. By the way, quinoa is the only whole grain that has all the essential amino acids in it, meaning if you ate it, you wouldn't have to combine it with some other protein-containing plant to get a complete protein. Millet, brown rice, oats, lightly pearled barley, bulgur wheat, which is used in a lot of Middle Eastern recipes. So lots of choices. Here's something I had to pay a lot of money in culinary school to learn, and I'm passing it on to you for free. So if you add vinegar or some other acid to a carbohydrate-containing meal, that can decrease the glycemic index. And if you sprout a whole grain by soaking it overnight, it's not going to develop a little plant sprouting out of it overnight. But if you sprout it and add a tablespoon of yogurt or kefir or vinegar or lemon juice, some kind of acid, then you drain it the next morning, rinse it off. It's going to be more digestible, increase the mineral content, and it's going to cook faster and you'll need less water. And I can give you more details about this later, but just culinary wonder here. So here are some whole foods that lower glycemic load and our inflammation. It's the same foods we saw on the list that are good for health in general, help feed the microbiome. Lots of choices here, and this looks so beautiful. I too am getting hungry. A second principle is using quality food, whether it's fresh, frozen, fermented, or canned. And quality doesn't mean it has to be expensive, but you don't want to use poor quality food or foods that are highly refined, have lots of things added to it. And you want to eat food natural. That means it's raised or grown as naturally as possible with lots of pesticides, chemicals, or hormones. You want to eat it as close to the way it looked when it came out of the ground or off the tree or the bush, like eating a whole baked potato with the skin on it versus a potato chip. And no, orange Jell-O does not count as a natural form of eating oranges. People say, is organic really better? Well, in terms of limiting the chemicals that are added to your food, and also foods that are raised organically actually tend to have possibly higher nutrition content, because when it's stressed out and has to fend for itself, say a pest is trying to bother it, it will send these phytonutrients into the plant that will make the plant healthier for you and more resistant to the microorganisms. But here's an example of this. These are 2 chicken livers, and pardon me if you're vegetarian, but just to give you an example, the chicken liver here on the left, all nice and shiny and dark red, this came from a chicken that was raised in the pasture and ate what chickens normally would eat, which is bugs and seeds and that sort of thing. This chicken liver came from a chicken where it said all natural, no hormones or antibiotics, but it wasn't fed an organic diet. So this tells me this chicken's liver had to work overtime to deal with the what might have been chemicals and other things coming in through its feed. When should you get organic? It turns out that not everything that's grown that they have to use a lot of pesticides or harmful chemicals. So this is the Environmental Working Group's Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. It changes every year, so they just now released 2024. And if I look at my shopping list and I have strawberries on the list, I am going to get organic strawberries. But if I have asparagus on the list, they are on the Clean 15. I'm not going to pay organic prices for that asparagus. And eat a varied diet, rinse all your produce, and when possible, or when actually indicated, then get organic. If it's processed, you need to learn to read the label, because it can be very deceptive. Peanut butter, hey, it's from a plant, it's from a peanut, it's got to be healthy for me. But if you look, and that one was reduced fat, by the way, which means they probably had to add a ton of other stuff to make it taste good. But you'll see the second ingredient, the third ingredient, corn syrup solids and sugar and all these other things that you can't even pronounce. So here is all natural organic peanut butter, 1 ingredient, peanuts. And don't be fooled. Everybody's jumping on the plant-based wagon. It used to be the low fat or no fat, but now it's plant-based. It's going to be healthy for you. And if you look on the back of this, Back to Nature plant-based snack, well, of course, graham crackers are plant-based. They're made from flour, which comes from a grain, which is wheat. So unbleached enriched wheat flour, didn't say it was whole wheat. It's wheat flour. And it's got cane sugar as the second ingredient, and then some other sugars in it. So don't be fooled by these labels. Now here's a good old strawberry. They're they're ripe right now, at least where I live in Virginia. And if you eat one fresh and ripe, you won't say anything caustic or cruel for 15 minutes thereafter. You can blame Garrison Keillor if he's not right about that. Another principle is eating local. Eating foods that's grown locally is good for a lot of reasons. One, because it didn't have to travel far to you, it's likely they didn't have to use preservatives on it. It's likely going to taste better and be fresher. They can pick it closer to ripeness before they put it in the stand or at the grocery store. And also it reduces strain on the environment, because they're not having to take things so far to get them to you. And lots of places to get local food, and you might even try growing some of your own. Some of the farmers markets honor the SNAP program and provide senior citizen discounts. Another principle is eating food in season. This helps you adapt to your environment. It's starting to get hot here in Virginia, and I am not so much feeling like eating winter root vegetables. I am eating lots of greens right now because they're coming out, and I'm eating turnips and peas and things like that. So these foods that are in season where you live take better care of you. Here's some chard, which is coming up now in my garden. It's a bit like spinach. In harmony with tradition is another principle. People often say, you know, I'm not used to eating a lot of whole grains and beans, and I don't know which ones I would like or would be the best for me. Well, a good way to figure that out is to find out what were the grains and the beans and the other traditional foods eaten by people of your family from the old country. So that could be several generations back. But find out if what were the beans and grains of your ancestors, and chances are you might enjoy those more and you might be able to digest them more. The other thing about it is you want to think about food rituals and emotional attachments. This makes eating so much more pleasurable and important and meaningful. And what are some of the food traditions of your faith and culture? At Smith Center, we were working with some groups in African American churches and African immigrant community, and they wanted a book of healthy soul food. And I'm like, yeah, you can make soul food healthy. And so we came up with this cookbook, and we're on our third printing that's very popular. Another principle is balance, which is dynamic. It changes over time. And if you have an illness, it might change what you need in your diet. So be willing to accommodate and give your body what it needs. And we're talking a healthy balance. You want to balance, of course, you want these nutrients that you need, essentially, carbohydrates, proteins, healthy fats, vitamins, and minerals. But you also want to think about variety. So eating a rainbow a day, choosing fruits and veggies that are in a rainbow of colors, and no, pistachio ice cream does not count as your green, okay? You can have it after you've eaten all this. But that's where the phytonutrients are, in those colors. And balance for textures and tastes and cooking methods. Healthy cooking used to have a bad rap because everything was kind of mushy and brown, but it doesn't have to be that way. And also you want to balance for quantity. If you put your two hands together and cup your hands like you were going to scoop up some water, your stomach can hold this much and still leave a part of your stomach for air, and so that you can digest your food. If you eat more than this, then you're going to have food coming up into your esophagus, or some of the food not being well cooked in your stomach before it gets to your intestines. Here's the new American plate if you want to know about how much of different kinds of foods to put on your plate. The rule is about 2/3 of your plate to come from plants, and then the other third could come if you eat poultry or fish, could be this part of the plate. Or you could have a totally vegetarian plate, and where you have your high protein food, you could have beans and rice, for instance. But most of the plants, again, coming from vegetables. And some examples of my plates. I took these pictures during the pandemic. I was doing some little cooking videos. So this is from my favorite Brazilian restaurant. So black beans and rice and collards and oranges and bananas and a salad. Here, and I'm pointing out how much of the plate is vegetable and fruit versus here is tuna fish patties I made from leftover tuna fish salad. Here's a breakfast with oatmeal, with nuts and fruits and yogurts, and I always have vegetables at breakfast. And I had a leftover kale and apple salad from a dinner the night before, and so I just took some of that. Here's another chia seed pudding with stewed apples and yogurt, a boiled egg from a happy chicken. And my favorite breakfast is to take greens, whatever I have on hand, and saute it with some onions or onion powder and garlic or garlic powder. Make a hole in the middle, crack this pastured egg and cover it and steam it. And this is my sunshine in the meadow. And a balanced view. Americans love to hear good news about their bad habits. So be aware of overdoing it when you hear that there might be something healthy about a food like dark chocolate. It's good for me, right? So now I can eat a whole chocolate bar every day. And no one particular food is either a demon or a panacea. So it's not like there's really magic bullets out there. Again, it's variety and everything in moderation, including moderation. And finally, it has to taste good. If it doesn't taste good, it's not going to be healthy because you're not going to want to eat it, or you're going to have like a stress reaction when you eat it, and that's not good either. So learning some steps to delicious, I could probably do a demo even virtually if you ever want to do that. I see somebody's from Frederick, Maryland. You might want to come down to Smith Center for some of our cooking classes that we do there. And now I am going to get ready to go to the kitchen and do a little food demo. Go ahead and we can get that food demo up here.
Welcome to my kitchen. This is the place where I do a healing practice for myself. And I suppose it would come under the category, well, lots of them: managing stress, eating well, creating a healing environment, sharing love. So lots of things come with cooking. And I can find that I might feel so out of sorts or even physically ill, and I come in the kitchen and I start preparing food and I feel like it's been a medicine without even eating the food. So what I'm going to make for you, I wish I could give it to you, but I'm going to show you how to make it, then you can make it for yourself, is a carob banana smoothie. The original recipe in Rebecca Katz's book, The Cancer Fighting Kitchen, calls for chocolate, but I've adapted it to use carob powder because chocolate in the evening, the caffeine in it sort of revs me up, and I don't really want to be revved up. And the other thing, carob powder is naturally sweet, so I don't even have to add anything extra sweet to this. The recipe usually calls for maple syrup. I'm going to share the recipe with you as chocolate and also substituting the carob. So you'll be given a copy of that. So let's take a look what's in this recipe. We have some non-dairy milk. You could use dairy milk if you want. I'm using unsweetened almond milk. The original recipe calls for flaxseed. You could use flaxseed ground up, or you could use chia seeds. And the chia seeds are going to add omega-3 fatty acids and fiber, and also it's going to thicken it. The longer the chia sits in liquid, the thicker, more gelatinous it becomes. The recipe calls for vanilla extract, so I've got a little bit of that here. Of course, there's a banana in here, and I'm showing a unfrozen banana, but we'll be using frozen bananas. And I just sort of keep a supply of frozen bananas in the freezer all summer long so I can have these nice treats. I added to the recipe some fresh strawberries because I think strawberries and chocolate or strawberries and carob go along well. Also raspberries do. And my neighbor has a strawberry patch and she said, pick some strawberries. So I'm going to add it to the mix. Another ingredient in here is almond butter. And what we're doing with the almond butter and the chia seeds is we're adding some fat and some protein. And that's going to make this drink actually more nourishing, more filling. And actually by adding the fiber and the protein and the fat, we're going to reduce the glycemic load of this drink. So adding fat, fiber, protein is going to reduce the speed with which your body takes up the sugar. Okay, so why don't we get started here? I'm going to make one serving for myself, so I'm going to put about a cup of almond milk. And I'm going to put a teaspoon of chia seeds. So these are black chia seeds. Toss that in there. This is the other good thing about chia seeds, it's a little easier to grind up than flax seeds are. With vanilla extract, you usually just need a tiny bit because it's concentrated, so it goes a long way. So I'm going to put really just 1/8 of a teaspoon in here. And there we go. And I'll go ahead and put the frozen bananas. By the way, when you put things in a blender, if you're going to have liquid, it's best to put the liquid first, and that'll help pull it down. In this, I'm going to put a couple of teaspoons of the almond butter. And by the way, I want to say I washed my hands really well before I came in here, and I've done that well before COVID was a thing. So good idea to wash your hands really well. I just put the strawberries in here. Now for the carob. I prefer to buy, at least when I'm going to have it in a dessert, I like to get the carob powder toasted. And I'm going to put a tablespoon in there. It's going to make it pretty strong. A little bit goes a long way. And then I'm going to put some ice to make it like a milkshake. So the carob and the banana are really what's going to sweeten this. And I'm going to make noise now. And I just want to say a few more things about carob. We know that chocolate, dark chocolate, has good health benefits, including lots of antioxidants. Carob is actually has a lot of good things to go for it. Low fat, low sodium. It has calcium, but it has no oxalates. Now, oxalates are what interferes with calcium absorption, and it can also cause kidney stones. And eating, say, lots of spinach. Spinach is high in oxalates. Carob is high in fiber. It's gluten-free, in case that's an issue. It's caffeine-free. It has antioxidant properties. And believe it or not, it helps relieve diarrhea so that it can be used for acute diarrhea. So lots of good medicinal properties to this drink. And I'm going to serve it up. I am so sorry you can't join me, but as soon as Smith Center office opens to have people come to classes, I want you to come to one of my cooking classes. But here's to carob banana smoothie. Oh my goodness, that's really good. Do try and make it for yourself.
Now I'll go back to sharing my screen. So glad we could work that out there. So we're in the home stretch here, folks. Another thing to think about is not only what you eat, but eating awareness. And these principles come from Ayurveda. So eating in a harmonious and happy environment Minimize your disturbances while eating. Try not to eat when you're emotionally upset. That turns on your sympathetic fight or flight nervous system when you need your parasympathetic nervous system, that's your rest and digest system. Favor eating while sitting down. Check your hunger level before you eat some more. So eat to 3/4 full, leaving room in your stomach for it to cook and digest your food. And then wait, until a few hours to eat again. Let your previous meal digest. You also drink small amounts of warm liquids when eating or room temperature. A lot of people think they're going to stock up on all their hydration when they eat their meal and they drink cold liquids, and this fills your stomach up and doesn't leave room for digestion, can lead to reflux and some food not being well digested by the time it gets in your intestines. And it sort of is diluting your acid, which is being used to cook and digest your food. Take several minutes after the meal to rest. Again, your rest and digest system needs time to digest it. And in general, if you can take your main meal at midday, that's when your digestive fire is at its peak. Also, I would recommend that you fast after your dinner meal. So eat your dinner meal fairly early and allow overnight so that you break your fast with breakfast. And in general, they're starting to recommend, about 13-hour fasts from your dinner meal until you have your breakfast. And eat what you enjoy. So if you're ready for a change, you'll find some ideas here on Cancer Choices. We have some tips on making lifestyle changes. If you need help and support putting nourishment on your plate, check out the Anti-Cancer Lifestyle Program. They have self-study modules that are great, and they have one on diet. They also have a great book on anti-inflammatory diet, because people have lots of questions about that. They just did a program with Dr. Lisa Altschuler and Carolyn Gazella. I just really admire these folks, and they did a whole program on creating a body that cancer doesn't like, and I put the link here to that. The American Institute for Cancer Research has their Healthy 10 Challenge, which is kind of an inspirational way of, and they sort of check on you if you do this healthy challenge, so you have some real-time incentives. If you need help and support putting nourishment on your plate, if you sign up for Cancer Choices newsletter, you get free access to Rebecca Katz's online cancer fighting kitchen course. We also on Cancer Choices give access to Ina, which is a personal nutrition assistant. And if she can't answer your questions, she's AI person, she will then refer you to one of their dietitians to answer your questions. Smith Center, if you're near the DC area, we do have live cooking classes, but we have lots of other great programs that are virtual on all sorts of complementary and lifestyle practices that can help with healing. And finally, it's not just about eating the food, but it's about the eating experience. So become involved in the prepping and the eating and the yum and the because one cannot think well, love well, or sleep well if one hasn't eaten well. So now I'll take your questions.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was so informative. And yes, I am hungry after listening to you talk about all the good foods. We had some questions coming into the chat, so I will funnel them to you. For those of you who are still with us, we're still recording. So this is why I am being the face. If you're okay with having your face recorded and out there in the internet, you will have a period of time where you can come on and ask directly, but this is what I'm doing for now. So let's get right to the questions. Lenore had a question. Is there a difference between eating turkey or chicken?
Well, that's a great question. Well, turkey, um, I would have to look that up. That's a really good question. In terms of it would have a slightly different nutrient panel. But what I would say about either is that if you can get the animal to be free range, free roaming, because we are what they eat. So in general, what the chicken eats, if they're eating corn, just sort of like I showed with the salmon, they're going to make a more inflammatory fat in their tissue. If they're eating nuts, seeds and worms, they're going to have a more anti-inflammatory fat in their tissue. So it sort of depends on what the animal is eating. Certainly a turkey will have more volume of white meat than a chicken will have. Of course, turkey does have dark meat as well. I would say, depending on the diet of the chicken or the turkey, would determine what kinds of fats are in it. But I would have to go and actually look up the difference in the nutrients in the tissue. I'm sure there's some differences.
And also, if you enjoy eating one over the other, that is a factor as well.
That's right.
Carol Lyon is asking, do you recommend a gluten-free diet?
Okay, well, if you have an issue with gluten, then certainly, and I have a gluten sensitivity, so I'm not allergic to it, meaning I don't have like anaphylaxis or breakout in hives. I don't have celiac disease, but I do have a gluten sensitivity and intolerance. And so for me, again, it's information. If I eat gluten, I will know, because I am not going to feel good in various ways. Not everyone has a gluten sensitivity. However, if someone has an autoimmune condition, and there are many kinds, eczema is one, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, celiac, many autoimmune thyroid disease. In general, because of what happens to the lining of the intestines, they become leaky. They become intolerant of a lot of foods like gluten, dairy, corn, soy. So then those folks would do better not eating gluten. A good way to know if you have a problem with gluten is to eliminate it from your diet for, say, a week and see how you feel, and then bring it back in a pretty hefty dose for the next 3 days after that, and see how you feel. And that will give you some idea. Now, apparently the wheat products like the pasta products and bread in the US, they tend to put more of isolate the gluten. It makes it chewy and things like that. So some people think that in the US, we're getting more gluten in our food. But in general, I wouldn't say you need to eliminate it unless you have an autoimmune condition or you have a sensitivity to it. But you might just want to go off of it for a while and see how you feel. If you're getting antibiotics or some treatments, or if you're on non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs or steroids, that can make your gut leaky, and it can make you sensitive to foods that most people aren't sensitive to. So that's another reason why you might want to try. And a lot of people getting cancer treatment, certain cancer treatments get lactose intolerance as well temporarily.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate the answer on that one. That's a great, I would like to test that myself.
Yeah. And someone made a comment, thank you, that the dark meat of turkey contains more iron. So your dark meat that it's dark that way because of the blood in the tissue there. That makes sense. So the dark meat of the turkey has more iron, and I know that anemia can be a problem in WM. It's not always an iron deficiency anemia, but if it is, then you would want to look for ways to replace your iron.
Wonderful. Our next question is kind of about cooking versus not cooking something and losing. So for example, spinach raw versus cooked and oxalic acid. But I know that I also had a question about broccoli cooking it versus
Yes.
cooking it. So I wonder if you can address those.
So, yes. So broccoli, for instance, and I love Ralph Moss, who's a cancer survivor. He's a writer, he's a cancer advisor, and he writes the Moss reports. So he talks about how broccoli, for instance, if you eat it raw, you're going to get certain nutrients that will be destroyed by cooking. But by cooking, you will heighten the nutritional value of other nutrients. So a good thing, and I thought this was great advice, Dr. Moss will eat a piece of broccoli raw and then cook the rest. And I don't cook it a lot. I'll cook it to, so slightly, it's bright green and it's tender, but it's not mush. Now, if you don't mind, I want to riff on greens a little bit. So raw things like kale, for instance, and it's in the broccoli family. We are not cows. So cows eat greens, right? They live off grass. And they're called ruminants, and they have several chambers in their stomach, and they also ruminate their food back into their mouth. It's worked on one chamber, they ruminate it back, chew it some more and bring it down. And they chew and they chew and they chew and they chew and they chew. We don't take the time to chew, and we don't have those 4 chambers, and we don't ruminate. So we aren't able to extract from the greens as much as a cow can because of that. So we need to cook our greens. And there's also some question that eating a lot of raw greens like kale, for instance, might lead to some issues in someone who already has low thyroid function. So cooking the greens is okay now. And actually, if people make kale smoothies, I recommend they maybe steam or blanch the kale a little bit. And you can maybe just blanch a whole bag full and put it in the freezer. Usually if it's a green is frozen, it's been blanched, meaning it's been put in hot water, then cooled off and then frozen. But I recommend that over raw kale in smoothies. So if you think about it, your food eventually is going to have to be cooked. Whether you cook it beforehand or it gets cooked in your stomach and gets worked on by the enzymes in your mouth, which is another good reason to chew well. So because humans figured out how to cook, we had to spend a lot less time chewing and getting food the way we did. And also it allowed for us not to have such big abdomens like a cow has. And a lot of that went to surface area in the brain. So, and cooking did that for us. So most food is, needs to be cooked, whether it's cooking it in your stomach or before it gets there. So by cooking a little bit ahead. And some people find that cooked broccoli, for instance, it's more digestible. Others might say, well, I get more gas if I eat it raw. So you kind of adjust it for yourself. Does that make sense?
It doesn't answer about spinach.
Oh, spinach, right. So, yes, so cooking spinach reduces the oxalic acid, right? So there are several foods that are naturally high in oxalic acid. Another one of them is beets. And I was cooking beets at the retreat this year, and I asked the fellow chef, I said, do beets kind of burn the back of your throat when you eat them? And she goes, yeah. And I said, I wonder what that is. So I looked it up, and it's from oxalic acid as well. And so if you cook the beets to the point where they're tender, then you won't get that burning effect. And so spinach also, so by cooking foods that are high in oxalic acid, I don't know, I'd have to look it up to see if it denatures the acid or reduces or makes it inert. But that's something to consider. But eating a lot of hot foods high in oxalic acid can be hard on your kidneys, for one thing, and also it interferes with calcium absorption. Have you heard otherwise about spinach?
I just understood that spinach salad was not a good idea as a regular part of your eating regimen because
Yes.
spinach is raw. That's where my question came from.
Okay, yes. So better cook. Some people even tolerate it less. I cannot eat raw spinach, and maybe it's the oxalic acid. And oxalic acid also raises histamine. So it can, in folks who already have issues with histamine and allergies and things like that, it can make it worse. But I do not eat raw spinach just because of the way it affects me. And I typically, at the retreats, if I'm gonna even have a spinach salad, I will toss it in the acid and the olive oil or whatever the dressing is gonna be, and let it sort of cook the spinach ahead, and that can make it more digestible. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for the questions. And we're kind of coming to the end of our time here, but I want to condense a few questions. Some of you are worried about certain things taking away or lessening the nutritive value of something. So microwaving, freezing something, and then canned versus cooked beans from scratch. So talking about the loss of nutritional value
Yeah.
going through these processes.
Yeah, I used to freak out about that too. And at our culinary school, we did. But the process now, the way they freeze produce and the way they can, it removes far less nutrients than it used to. And so some of the nutritionists I've consulted saying, in general, it's okay. I mean, and I suggest eating, some things frozen, some things not, but in a pinch, it's nice to have some things in the freezer. And beans, if you have to cook beans a lot to get them, tender and digestible. And so the process of canning the beans is, it's really not a big deal. I mean, if you ever cook beans from scratch, you got to soak them, then you have to cook them sometimes a long time. So don't be afraid to keep some beans in your pantry and some frozen vegetable. I mean, it gets you to eat these things because it's convenient and they're pretty nutritious. Thank you for that question.
Where do you stand on microwaving?
Oh, okay. Well, I have different stances about it. But this food scientist at university once told me, microwaving food at least doesn't burn it, because we had lots of stomach cancer a long time ago because we would char food the way we had to cook it. And because you're not having to necessarily use a lot of water, a lot of your nutrients are not getting into the water. So, and then I've had other people say I wouldn't stand near one, or, that sort of thing. So I've seen some studies where the nutritive value is not that different after microwaving, but I keep one so I can heat things up really quickly, for that kind of convenience. I tend to prefer to cook my vegetables differently than a microwave.
Got it. Thank you so much. We have a couple folks asking about probiotics, and then specifically one person here is saying that she's got gastroparesis from her chemo treatment that's improving. Can she take probiotics? Are prebiotics important? She also has SIBO.
Yeah, SIBO. Oh,
SIBO.
gosh, this is, I kind of know about this because I just took a class on this. It is complex. If you have SIBO and now gastroparesis, you probably need some targeted balancing of your microbiome. But to give you advice about that today, I couldn't. But if you want to email me, I can put you in touch with, unless you have a good doctor to work with you on this, I can tell you what kind of doctors are really good at this. And there's one who's actually an integrative oncologist who works with people with those types of gut issues who also have cancer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Probiotics and prebiotics are such a topic. We've had some webinar content on this, and it's definitely something we're looking forward to continuing to learn more about. Questions about, let's see here, minerals, liquid minerals. Somebody is asking, is that okay to take those?
Yeah, so I will say I pretty much stick with food. And I'm not an expert on supplementation. I do take magnesium in a liquid form for magnesium replacement, but I would say you need to check in, definitely get your blood check because you may be low in certain minerals or high in others. And I wish I were more of an expert to tell you, yes, it's okay, or no, it's not okay to take liquid minerals. But I work as much as possible to help people get what they need from their food. I will say there's a recipe called Magic Mineral Broth. Rebecca Katz developed that. I think you can access it on the internet for free, Magic Mineral Broth. And it is loaded with minerals, but it doesn't use any animal sources, or you can make bone broth. And sea vegetables are very high in minerals. And so there are sea vegetables in that Magic Mineral Broth. So that's a pretty safe way to get minerals in your food, especially through broths and things like that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura. I have one more question, and this is coming from a question that I received before the webinar about what foods to eat to boost iron levels.
Okay, well, there are lots of them. One of the most obvious sources, which I know it's not a plant, but is, like animal organs, liver, that sort of thing. Beef more so than chicken livers. But your dark leafy greens are high in iron. There's a grain called amaranth that's high in iron. I have a recipe. If you remind me, I can send it to you for, I forgot what my friend calls it, but it's high in iron, and it uses amaranth flour in the muffins. It also uses organic molasses, which is high in iron, but not much molasses, because we don't want to make things too sweet. Raisins are high in iron. Spinach is, but as we talked about, you want to watch for the oxalic acid, but if you can certainly cook that spinach, and if you want to drink the juice from it, so that's another good source of iron. I'm sure I'm missing some. Does anybody, if I am, if you want to put it in the chat, feel free.
That's wonderful, Laura. Thank you so much. we're going to close our recorded portion now. If you love learning from Laura today, please let us know on our follow-up poll that's going to be coming out in our email. And we'll send that out with the recording so you can look back on all of this amazing information. I'm going to have Laura's slides in that follow-up email and some of the resources she talked about. So please check your emails in the next few days after we download all of this. And then next month, our session is going to be on the holistic healing system of Reiki. And that will be with our very own Sharon Rivet, who was diagnosed with Waldenstrom's in 2018 and used Reiki to help get through her treatment and all the ups and downs of Waldenstrom's. So thank you so much to Laura. If you want to stick around for maybe one more minute. But thank you so much, Laura.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
your